I'm very interested in the historical techniques, but I always try to mix in modern approaches or see how I can build a bridge from the old to the new.
You are tempting me to things. I am here today with Barbara of Royal Black Couture, who has been on this channel a number of times before, here to teach us all the wonderful things about sewing and tailoring. You are a professionally trained tailor.
I'm really happy to be on the channel again. Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure.
Today we are going to be focusing on hip padding and how that functions when it's built into garments, because I've spoken a lot on this channel about how important hip padding can be in achieving a very specific silhouette in terms of the Edwardians, and they tend to use external hip padding. But by the 1950s, you start getting really interesting things happening in couture tailoring where the structure is built into the garment. The garment is heavily tailored and structured, and that hip padding just makes all the difference in that shape.
Yeah.
So Barbara has done a really interesting project recently where you have recreated one of these classic quintessential Dior new look jackets.
It all started for me when I went to the big Christian Dior exhibition in Paris a few years ago. I was in awe of Dior's mastery of creating shape and silhouette with his tailoring skills. And one of the pieces that really stood out to me was the famous parachute jacket. I just saw the shape, the nipped in small waist and the flared out hips, and it fascinated me because my specialty are corsets, and they also have this hourglass shape. And I was asking myself, how did they achieve this shape?
Well, it's a shape that recurs throughout history. Like in almost every century, fashion in history was more about creating a shape, and how can you do that by building the shape that you want rather than having to mold your intrinsic self to the shape or even against the shape that you naturally are. It is an art form in and of itself, and it does incredible things to the clothes, to the body, to the self-esteem.
Yeah, when I looked at the jacket, I tried to figure out what I saw in front of me, how that shape was created. So last year, when I spoke to two of my colleagues, we came up with the idea to try and recreate this garment for studying purposes and really figure out how this shape was created. So I started doing some research about how the jacket was made, and I found a lot of people saying that there was padding inside the hips, but I couldn't find any pictures or any in-depth detail shots about how the inside was put together. And I figured that I had to dig in deeper and try myself and figure it out with trial and error. I can say that I figured it out in the end, and I would like to take you on a little journey with me and show you how we ended up doing it. The first material I have got here is silk organza, which is a very light but still stiff material. And it's well suited to interface fabrics to give it a bit more body, a bit more structure. And in the case of my jacket project, I used it to interface all the jacket panels because I used a quite soft and thin wool crepe as outer fabric, and that was a bit too slippery and slidey, and it didn't keep the shape very well. But with this extra layer of silk organza, it already had a bit of base stability, and I could add any type of further interfacing and padding on top of it. So you would only need some kind of interfacing like that if your fabric is very thin. If you're using something like tweed or a bit of a heavier wool fabric, you don't need this. It's just if your fabric is too thin to keep the shape on its own. Next up, we have different types of hair canvas. Hair canvas is very typical for menswear tailoring. There are a lot of different weights and material blends available. The first one I have got here, it is a fiber blend. I think it is a mix of sheep hair and goat hair, and it might also have a bit of cotton and linen in. But as you can see, it is quite soft and not as stiff as some of the ones that I will show you in a minute. Next up, I have a very common horsehair canvas. It's medium weight, so not super stiff and sturdy, but definitely has more weight than the goat and sheep blend that I've just shown you. You would use this for traditional menswear, for anything that still needs to move a bit, not super structured. And you always would use it this way, so the springy quality is aligned with the waistline and the softer drapier quality is aligned with the center front. I also want to show you a very stiff horsehair canvas type. This would be used for the front part of jackets where you want to create a very sturdy, structured look, because this really doesn't move much. So not really suitable for anything like the project we are talking about today. We have talked about interfacing materials now, but if we want to create volume, we need material to fill out the space. There are different types of wadding materials that we can use. I have got two quite traditional ones here. This is cotton wadding. It's quite densely woven on the thinner side, and you can apply it in layers to build up shapes and volume as desired. And then we have, I believe the English word is ice wool. So it's a very soft and stretchy material and very fluffy. So if you want to create a bit of shape that isn't too dense and too stiff, then ice wool would be a good material. If you can't find any of these traditional materials, there is the modern equivalent to cotton wadding, which is polyester wadding. It's much more affordable. It's a bit more stiff, but you can still use it to build up a nice amount of volume by applying it in layers. I used to work at the theater for a while, and in theater shoulder pads are often used to pad out costumes because it's a very quick and easy fix for padding purposes. I know that some traditional tailors wouldn't approve to use shoulder pads for couture pieces, but I kind of like to mix techniques from different branches like theater and couture. This type of shoulder pads, they are quite large ones. They are used in menswear because they are quite heavy, and in menswear you often want to achieve a very structured shoulder, and the outside is smooth and flat, but on the inside you have horsehair, you have the cotton wadding that I have shown you before. So it's all there, but it's already combined into one solid shape, and that can save some time and make your life easier when you want to achieve padding. As I mentioned before, the jacket panels were interfaced with this silk organza to give it some body, but that was nowhere near enough amount of stability and stiffness. So I decided to use this hair blend canvas to reinforce the entire bottom and hip area from the waist downwards. You can see that I cut panels of the horsehair canvas which have the same size and shape as the outer layer of the jacket, and I attached it to the inside with pad stitches and catch stitches. That way it's another layer of reinforcement inside the jacket, but you don't see anything of it on the outside. That is also an advantage of the silk organza interfacing, that you can use it to attach further layers of padding and interfacing without seeing any stitches on the outside. I then put the jacket on the dress form and tried to check if it already was enough of stability and stiffness, but of course it wasn't. I knew I needed to add more of the padding. I found some info online that people worked with cotton wadding and ice wool for the padding, so I tried that next. I applied several layers of it, stitched it in place carefully, but when I put it on the dress form, it looked bulky, but still hung down limply and didn't have the desired effect at all, which was quite frustrating because I had done all the stitching work for nothing. But I figured out that I needed to find a different solution. So I removed the wadding layers, and then I resolved to my theater tricks, and I used some of these menswear shoulder pads. I just pinned them into the jacket on the dress form and looked at it, and it kept the shape very nicely. It was spread out, flared out like I wanted it to be, but it didn't have any of the unevenness and bulk that the wadding had added before. That was when I thought, yeah, Christian Dior might not approve, but if it works, hey, why not do it with shoulder pads? I figured out the amount and placement of the pads I wanted to use on the dress form, and then I started to attach the pads with hand stitches on the inside by sewing it to the horsehair canvas underneath, again taking care that none of the hand stitches would be visible on the outside. That's what I would like to show you with a little demonstration now, because you can use this kind of padding technique for only the hip area of other garments, or you could pad out the back of a jacket. It's quite versatile, and you can decide and experiment on the dress form what kind of shape and amount of volume you want to achieve. I have prepared a sample jacket back here where I can show you how to actually attach the padding. So this here would be the waistline, and down here we have the hem, and it already has the hair blend canvas sewn to the inside, as I have explained before. So now you would take the first pad. I added the padding from the center back towards the front because I thought that would be the most sensible order to attach it. And I started by placing one of the shoulder pads in the middle. Then I decided to trim off a bit of the top to make it more tapered down. If your padding is quite big, you can cut it down to the desired shape. You can also attach a bit of wadding in between if you feel it needs more volume. And now it's really important to kind of roll pin it to work shape into the padding, because if the jacket sits on the body, the outer layers need a bit more ease than the padding on the inside, otherwise it would wrinkle and cause pulling issues. So when I insert the pad into the jacket, I would pin it in a round shape, like it sits on the body, and that way you work the extra ease into the outer layer. This is first done with pins, but also later when you actually sew in the pads, you also should do that in the round shape that the jacket should have later, because otherwise it won't really do what it's supposed to. I attach it on the sides first, and I'll add another pin at the top. Here, down here, the point is going into the seam allowance, and I trim that off because it should stop before the seam allowance. And now the first pad is in place. It's pinned where I want it to be, and I can start stitching it into place by hand, making sure that I only catch the horsehair canvas but not the outer layer of the fabric, because we don't want any stitching visible on the outside. I'm using a catch stitch for that purpose because it flattens the edges and it keeps all the layers in place. And I would start in the left corner and work my way all around the edges, but I would leave open the bottom edge because it's quite bulky, and catch stitching it would kind of pull from the outside and it might show. I always make sure to keep the jacket in the round shape. I'm working extra ease in the outer layer of the jacket and keeping the padding a bit shorter, so it already creates the smooth round shape. So we have the first pad stitched in place now. If you take a look, you can see it has a bit of roundness worked into it already. From the center back, I would attach the next pads towards the side and again pin it in place in a round shape to create more of that hip shape that we want to achieve. And when you have added the next pads with pins, I think it also makes sense to check on the dress form if it hangs nicely, if it doesn't create pulling anywhere, and if you're happy with the shape that it creates. Again, I'm trimming off any parts of the shoulder pads that I don't think fit my purposes. And as you can see here, I have now attached 2 more pads. It already has quite some stiffness and it keeps the shape well. I would attach these in the same way with catch stitches around the edges and then move on with the next ones until the entire hem is smoothed out. And yeah, if you put it on the dress form, then you will see that you have created that nice round shape that we have seen on the original Dior jacket.
Well, that was super interesting. That is, I mean, I know I've worked a lot with like historical understructures, but not so much building that structure into a jacket.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I so want to try it now. You are tempting me to things.
Well, in the beginning I felt a bit like an imposter because I was using modern shoulder pads, but then I thought, why not, if there are techniques and ways to achieve the same result faster and probably even a bit more smooth and precise, why not use it? There might be other people having achieved good results with different techniques, but there are always a lot of ways to do stuff in tailoring and sewing, and that is just one of them.
That's also the beauty of studying historical dress and, you know, looking at a silhouette and sort of learning how it was done so that you can sort of build on top of that knowledge. You know,
Yeah.
We look at a historical garment and say, I love that shape. What are the techniques that they used? How can we use some of the modern tools and resources and techniques that are available to us today? Now we have fusible interfacings. Now we have pre-made shoulder pads.
Yeah.
I mean, they were using very similar techniques. You've just made the process a little bit easier and faster.
I feel that's kind of my approach to tailoring and dressmaking anyways. I'm very interested in the historical techniques, but I always try to mix in modern approaches or see how I can build a bridge from the old to the new and combine techniques.
To absolutely spectacular result too. Such an interesting area to explore. Thank you very much for joining us on yet another one of these spectacular technique workshop adventures, hosted by
Maybe featuring?
Yeah. Featuring featuring the spectacular Barbara with all her amazing knowledge. If you would like to see more of Barbara, all of her links are down in the description. She's got a fabulous website exhibiting all of her work. Thank you again for coming on this channel and for imparting your wisdom to all of us today. We both wish you very well on your continued sewing journeys, if any of you give this a try in any sort of garment.
Happy sewing and thanks for joining in. Goodbye.
Goodbye. This is what it devolves into by the end. Something will be made of this.
Yeah.
I have definitely ended videos where I'm just like, okay, bye.